Hi, I'm Michael Coker. I'm a lawyer in Georgia, and today I'm going to talk to you about perjury, what it means, what the effects are of doing it, and how it could ultimately affect you. So stay tuned. Perjury is something that's talked about often, rarely is something that you see or hear until it becomes a major issue. So perjury is where you get on the witness stand. And when you get on a witness stand in a trial or in a deposition, you are raising your right hand and you're taking an oath and you're swearing to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, just like you see in the movies. And so if some fact or some piece of evidence comes out after you've given that testimony and you've taken that oath, then ultimately it shows that you were lying on the first time you gave that testimony. You face a very real risk of something called perjury. And perjury is a crime in most states. Committing perjury can lead to a fine. It can even lead to jail time. And so it's a very serious thing because we rely on people to tell the truth in court. Because by telling the truth, it's the only way that we can get down to the true justice system that we have that relies on eyewitness testimony. And so there's an assumption that everybody's telling the truth, that everybody wants what's best for the system, but unfortunately, that's not always the case. And so sometimes you see witnesses who give a deposition or who give this trial testimony and they lie. And then something comes out later that shows that they knew, whether it be a video, whether it be a phone call recording, whether it be some other evidentiary item that shows that that person ultimately lied in their first testimony, then they are now at risk of perjury. Now, perjury is a crime, and the decision to pursue someone for perjury usually comes from either a district attorney or a solicitor general in the area where the perjury is committed. If it's a federal case, it could be the U.S. Attorney's Office. If it's a state case, it could be a state court, district attorney, or solicitor general. And basically what they'll do is they'll review the testimony and they'll review the evidence, which shows that the original testimony was untruthful. And ultimately, they will pursue a criminal charge against that individual. And now, what seemed like a little innocent, maybe stretching the truth or not telling the whole truth, now is a very real risk that that individual could face jail time. And so that's why it's very important when you give testimony to always make sure that you tell the truth. And if there's any concern, let's say there's a concern that, you might say something that might implicate you for a crime. The entire country has a legal doctrine where there's an amendment where you can what's called plead the fifth, meaning like you can plead the fifth in a situation where if you tell the truth and you give testimony that you ultimately could incriminate yourself, and so you're going to invoke your right. Because the Fifth Amendment basically says that no one is required to basically incriminate themselves with their own testimony. And so that is an option. But I'm going to tell you this. If you are even considering taking the fifth, if you are considering or you're concerned whether telling the truth could ultimately implicate you for a crime, I always recommend that you talk to your own independent lawyer. Don't just trust the company attorney. Don't just trust some attorney for a car insurance company that maybe is representing you. Talk to your own independent criminal defense attorney because they're going to be able to advise you on when you should take the fifth and when you should not. I never recommend that an individual walk into court and just plead the fifth without first speaking to an attorney to understand what their legal rights are, what questions they're allowed to plead the fifth for, and which ones they're not. Because it's very complicated. There's a lot of U.S. Supreme Court cases that talk about this, and only an experienced attorney who does criminal defense is going to understand these aspects and when you should not plead the fifth when it's appropriate. And so if you have a concern, right, if you're like, listen, is this a situation where I should tell the truth or plead the fifth? Again, just talk to a lawyer. Don't mess around with this because you would hate for some small thing to ultimately lead to your own criminal incarceration. And so it's definitely not something you want to mess around with. That's what perjury is. It's when ultimately some fact comes out that shows that a person in their testimony was dishonest. And so again, if there's any doubt, if you have any concern, just talk to your own independent lawyer. Pick up the phone, call them. Many lawyers will give you free advice over the phone, even just to make sure that you're protected. That's why we went to law school, right? Is to protect people, to make sure they know what their rights are. And so you absolutely should do that to make sure that you're protected. So that's a brief explanation of what perjury is. If you like getting these updates, obviously like and subscribe to this podcast, and I'll keep them coming out. But until next time, stay safe, everyone, and we'll see you next time.